The year is 1991. The world stands on the brink of a new era, unaware of the seismic shifts about to unfold. The world watches in astonishment as a superpower crumbles. The Soviet Union, a colossal entity that once dominated global politics, is disintegrating before our eyes. The Soviet Union, a nation that once instilled fear and awe, dissolves into history. Its vast territories and diverse peoples are now on the cusp of newfound independence. For decades, this communist behemoth stood toe-to-toe with the United States. The two superpowers engaged in a relentless struggle for supremacy, influencing every corner of the globe. It was a rivalry that defined the Cold War, a period marked by intense political and military tension, espionage, and the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. Yet, in a stunning turn of events, the Soviet flag lowered for the last time. The red banner, once a symbol of communist power, is replaced by the tricolor of the Russian Federation. The Soviet Union's collapse was not a sudden earthquake. It was more like a slow-motion avalanche, a gradual disintegration that had been building for years. It was more like a slow-motion avalanche. Years of economic stagnation, political repression, and ethnic tensions had weakened its foundations. The once mighty economy was in shambles, and the people were growing increasingly disillusioned. Years of economic stagnation, political repression, and ethnic tensions had weakened its foundations. The cracks in the system were becoming impossible to ignore, and the calls for change grew louder. The seeds of discontent were sown long before the final dramatic act. Protests and uprisings became more frequent, as citizens demanded greater freedoms and better living conditions. Understanding the Soviet Union's demise is to unravel a complex tapestry of internal contradictions and external pressures. The leadership struggled to maintain control, while the world watched with bated breath. This is the story of how an empire built on ideology and iron fist ultimately crumbled under its own weight. The grand promises of communism gave way to the harsh realities of an unsustainable system. It's a tale of hubris and hope, of revolution and reform, of a system that ultimately proved unsustainable. Gorbachev's reforms, while well-intentioned, only hastened the collapse. The Soviet Union's collapse holds profound lessons for the world. It serves as a case study in the dangers of rigid ideology and the necessity of adaptability. It serves as a reminder that even the mightiest empires are not immune to the forces of change. The monuments of the Soviet era, once symbols of power, are now relics of a bygone age. It underscores the importance of economic vitality, political legitimacy, and national unity. Modern nations must heed these lessons to avoid similar fates. The Soviet Union's demise continues to shape global politics and international relations today. Its legacy is a testament to the enduring impact of history on the present and future. To understand the Soviet Union's collapse, we must first journey back to its tumultuous beginnings, a time of great upheaval and transformation. The story begins in the ashes of World War I, a conflict that left Europe in ruins and set the stage for dramatic political changes. Tsarist Russia, weakened and demoralized by the war, faced a popular uprising fueled by widespread discontent and a desire for change. Vladimir Lenin, a revolutionary leader with a vision for a new society, seized the opportunity to lead the charge. He promised peace, land, and bread to the weary Russian masses, offering hope to those suffering from the war's devastation and economic hardship. Lenin's Bolsheviks, a communist party, toppled the Tsar in the 1917 October Revolution, marking the beginning of a new era. They established the world's first communist state, a bold experiment in social and economic engineering. This new nation was forged in the crucible of civil war, a brutal conflict that lasted until 1922, pitting the Red Army against various anti-Bolshevik forces. The Bolsheviks emerged victorious, but the nation was deeply scarred by the violence and destruction. Under Lenin's successor Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union underwent a period of rapid industrialization and forced collectivization, transforming the agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse. Stalin's policies were ruthless and unforgiving, leading to widespread suffering and loss of life. Millions perished in famines and purges, victims of the harsh measures imposed by the regime. The Soviet Union transformed into a totalitarian state, with the Communist Party holding absolute power and controlling every aspect of life. Despite the human cost, the Soviet Union emerged as a major industrial and military power, capable of competing on the global stage. It played a pivotal role in defeating Nazi Germany in World War II, a conflict that tested the nation's resilience and strength. This victory cemented the Soviet Union's status as a global superpower, a position it would hold for decades to come, shaping the course of the 20th century. Beneath the facade of Soviet strength, cracks began to appear. The Soviet economy, centrally planned and inefficient, struggled to keep pace with the West. Consumer goods were scarce. Technological innovation lagged behind. The vast military-industrial complex drained resources from other sectors. Political repression stifled dissent and innovation. The Communist Party maintained an iron grip on all aspects of life. Freedom of speech, assembly, and the press were non-existent. Citizens who dared to challenge the system faced imprisonment, exile, or worse. Despite the risks, dissent simmered beneath the surface. Dissatisfied intellectuals, workers, and ethnic minorities yearned for greater freedom and opportunity. The Soviet Union's vast empire, comprising diverse nationalities and cultures, faced growing centrifugal forces. Nationalist sentiments, suppressed for decades, began to resurface. Economic stagnation, political repression, and rising nationalism formed a potent cocktail. The Soviet system, once seemingly invincible, was becoming increasingly brittle. Section 4. Gorbachev's Gamble. Reform and its unintended consequences. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, a relatively young and dynamic leader, took the helm of the Soviet Union. He was seen as a breath of fresh air, a leader with a vision to transform the ailing superpower. Gorbachev recognized the urgent need for change. The Soviet Union was grappling with economic stagnation, political rigidity, and a society yearning for more freedom. He initiated a series of reforms known as Perestroika, which means restructuring, and Glasnost, which means openness. These reforms were designed to address the deep-seated issues plaguing the nation. Perestroika aimed to revitalize the stagnant Soviet economy. It sought to introduce elements of market economics into the socialist system, hoping to boost productivity and innovation. It introduced limited market mechanisms and encouraged private enterprise. Small businesses began to emerge, and there was a sense of cautious optimism among the populace. Glasnost aimed to create a more open and transparent society. It was a bold move to reduce the iron grip of censorship and allow for more public discourse. It relaxed censorship and encouraged greater freedom of expression. For the first time in decades, Soviet citizens could openly discuss and criticize government policies. Gorbachev's reforms, while well-intentioned, unleashed forces he could not control. The newfound freedoms led to a surge in public discontent and demands for more radical changes. Economic reforms led to shortages and inflation, fueling public discontent. The transition was rocky, and many citizens found themselves worse off than before. Political openness emboldened critics and unleashed long-suppressed grievances. Dissidents and reformers alike took to the streets, demanding more than Gorbachev had anticipated. Nationalist movements, empowered by Glasnost, gained momentum. Republics within the Soviet Union began to push for greater autonomy and even independence. The Soviet Union, once a monolith, was now a cauldron of competing voices and aspirations. Ethnic and regional tensions that had been suppressed for decades erupted into the open. Gorbachev's attempts to reform the system from within inadvertently hastened its demise. The very changes he hoped would save the Soviet Union instead accelerated its collapse. His legacy remains a subject of debate, a reformer who tried to save a dying system or the leader who inadvertently brought down an empire. Gorbachev's gamble with reform left an indelible mark on history, forever changing the course of the 20th century. Section 5. The tide of change nationalism sweeps the empire. The late 1980s witnessed a surge of nationalist movements across the Soviet Empire. From the Baltic states to the Caucasus to Central Asia, long-suppressed ethnic and national identities reasserted themselves. People yearned for self-determination, for the right to chart their own destinies. In 1989, a pivotal year, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union, weakened from within, watched as its satellite states broke free from its orbit. The winds of change blowing across Eastern Europe soon became a hurricane within the Soviet Union itself. The Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were at the forefront of the independence movement. They declared their sovereignty, defying Moscow's authority. Other republics, emboldened by the Baltic states' defiance, followed suit. The Soviet Union was unraveling at its seams. Section 6, August coup, the death knell of a superpower. In August 1991, a group of hardline communists, fearing the imminent collapse of the Soviet Union, staged a coup against Gorbachev. They placed him under house arrest and attempted to seize control of the government. The coup plotters, however, miscalculated the public mood and the people's resolve. The attempted coup triggered a wave of popular resistance across the nation. Citizens took to the streets of Moscow and other cities demanding the restoration of Gorbachev and an end to communist rule. The coup leaders, lacking popular support, found themselves isolated and outmaneuvered. After 3 tense days, the coup collapsed under its own weight. Gorbachev returned to Moscow, but his authority was fatally undermined. The events of August 1991 marked the point of no return for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, mortally wounded, was living on borrowed time, its end inevitable. Section 7, December 1991. The Fall and the Rise of New Nations. On December 8, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met in a Belarusian hunting lodge called Belavezha Forest. In a stunning move, they signed the Belavezha Accords, declaring the Soviet Union dissolved. Gorbachev, sidelined and powerless, could only watch as his country ceased to exist. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned as the Soviet president. The Soviet flag was lowered for the last time over the Kremlin, replaced by the Russian tricolor. The Soviet Union, a global superpower that had endured for nearly 70 years, was no more. In the Soviet Union's place emerged 15 newly independent states. Each faced the daunting task of building new nations from the wreckage of the old empire. The transition was often chaotic and painful. Economic hardship, political instability, and ethnic conflicts plagued the former Soviet republics.